because this process is completely being elucidated by scientists. Okay, so we know that how the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium has been uptaken from soils into root tissues, and from root tissues into organic materials. Okay. For other elements, ada setengah elemen yang saintis tak tahu lagi macam mana mechanisms of uptake of these elements by plant roots. Okay, and its assimilations process within plants, tissue, and cells. Okay, but for NPK, it's being dah tahu. Okay, actually for nitrogens lah. So nitrogens, sorry sekejap saya rasa saya dah edit slide ni tadi pagi, so saya ambil yang lama. So for nitrogens, so remember nitrogens are available for plant nutrients uptake in two forms, nitrates and also ammonia. Nitrate is primary forms of nitrogens for plant nutrients uptake in aerated soils. Apa maksud aerated soils? Soils yang ada, yang mengandungi oksigen yang cukup, where the organisms or plant tissues in these soils tadi saya nak cakap lupa lah. Dalam plant ataupun bakteria dalam keadaan ni dia berrespirasi melalui aerobic conditions. Okay, sekejap ya. Saya nak buka slide saya yang saya dah ada edit sikit. Yang tadi saya tunjuk ni slide yang lama. Okey, tak apa, saya terangkan dulu untuk slide satu ni. Okay, this slide. So nitrogens, target early uptake nitrogens in two ionic forms, nitrates and also ammoniums. Okay, so nitrates is the primary nitrogen uptake by plant in aerated soil. Okay, what is mean by aerated soils? In aerated soils, plant root tissues respirate in aerobic conditions. Maksudnya keadaan yang cukup oxygen. Whereas ammoniums is primary nitrogens that being uptake by plant in anaerobic conditions. Example of anaerobic conditions is paddy fields, okay, or in submerged conditions. Okay, so why in submerged conditions plant uptake nitrogens primarily in ammonium conditions, in ammonium forms? Kenapa? Siapa boleh agak-agak? Ada siapa tahu? Tak ada? So in completely aerated soils, maksudnya tanah yang pengudaraannya baik, di mana oksigen banyak. Okay, so nitrogens usually in soils, um, awak tadi in nitrogen cycles. Okay, so saya terangkan dulu dalam nitrogen cycles tadi. In nitrogen cycles, if you still remember, the mineralizations of ammoniums happens when the organic nitrogens converted into ammonia. Okay, and then ammonia will be converted into nitrates. So the composition process, the complete composition process will be conversions of inorganic nitrogen into ammonia, and then ammonia to nitrates. Okay, but in aerobic conditions where oxygen concentrations is very low, the ammonia cannot be converted into nitrates. Sebab apa? Kekurangan oksigen. So berlaku macam usually this happen in submerged conditions, dalam keadaan berair, di mana oxygen dissolved in water is very limited. So the composition process will not be completed into nitrogen and nitrates. It will stop to ammonia only. So sebab itu ammonia biasanya banyak dalam kawasan aerobics and anaerobics. Okay. So sebab itulah tumbuhan, plant-plant that live in aerobic conditions and aerobic conditions macam sawah padi, okay, dia punya uh, main nutrients uptake untuk nitrogens adalah dalam bentuk ammoniums. Okay. Okay, so ini adalah saya punya, nanti saya upload balik dalam e-taklim. Okay, so nitrate, the main source of nitrogens under normal aerated conditions, and ammoniums predominate in flooded and aerobic soils. Okay, so both ammoniums and nitrates are being taken up by plant roots via active transport. Okay, what is meant by active transport? Transportations across cell membranes that require energy. Okay, so the uptake of nitrogens and ammoniums involve specific transport proteins. For nitrates, they are nitrate transporter that exists in cell membrane cells. Okay, same goes to ammoniums. They are ammoniums transporter that exists in plasma membranes of root cells. Because plant that live in aerated conditions uptake nitrogens mainly in nitrates forms. So the nitrate transporter in this type of plants will be higher compared to ammonium transporter. Okay. So kalau plant dalam aerated conditions, the plant yang hidup dalam kawasan yang beroksigen atau aerobic, dia juga boleh absorb ammonium. Okay. Tapi compared to nitrates, the concentrations uptake by this kind of plant will be higher compared to ammoniums. Okay. On the other hand, macam pokok yang hidup dalam anaerobic conditions, macam pokok padi, their main source of nitrogen is ammonium. So the ammonium transporter will be exist in higher amount compared to nitrate transporter. So ammonium transporter require ATP, whereas nitrate transporter use proton gradients for nitrate transportations. Okay. So how plant roots absorbs nitrogen from soil solutions? First, the plant root will pump out hydrogen ion to rhizosphere. Okay, so this process will cause acidifications of soil solutions. Okay, the pumps the proton ATPase in plasma membranes. We pump out proton out from cells, okay, and then producing pH and also electrical gradients. So the nitrate transporter will co-transport two or more protons per nitrate into the cells. Nitrogen is transported from the roots to the shoot via xylems in the form of nitrates, dissolved ammonia and ammonia acids. Okay, so macam mana proses dia berlaku? First, proton ATPase will pump out uh, hydrogen ion into rheosphere. So this process will induce high concentrations of proton on rheosphere soils. To balance these electrical gradients and pH, the apa, the plant cells will co-transport nitrate into the cells. Okay, what will happens to nitrate when it in plant root tissues? It can be efflux, go out again to rhizosphere, or it can be stored in vacuoles and translocated throughout the plant tissue via xylems. But before it can be transported into xylems, it must be reduced to nitrates. Okay, so this is the process that involved in nitrogen assimilations. What is mean by nitrogen assimilations? Is the process of organic compound that contains nitrogens. Okay, so if the plant takes nitrogens in the form of nitrates, it must be reduced to nitrate phase. It must be reduced to ammoniums. So the process involves two steps. First, the nitrate will be reduced to nitrate by nitrate reductase. So this process required two NADH and produce one water molecules. Okay, so dekat sini ada tiga oxygens ni dia akan pindahkan ke dua molekul dua atoms hydrogens daripada NADH to produce water molecules and also nitrates. Okay, so this process catalyzed by nitrate reductase. So this is the first step of the process. So this process occur in cytoplasms of root cells. Okay, so the nitrates can dissolve in apa kita tahu dalam plant cells, plant tissues ada air. So these nitrates dissolve dalam apa air sebab dia melalui xylems. Xylems adalah tissues that transport water. So this nitrate dissolve as a nitric acids. Okay, and then nitrates will be reduced to ammoniums by nitrate reductase and ferredoxins. Okay, so this process required 6 ferredoxins ion. Okay, it will produce 2 water molecules and produce 1 ammonium. Okay, so proses ini berlaku dekat sama ada dekat mitokondria. If kalau proses ni berlaku dekat root tissues, dia akan berlaku dekat mitokondria. If this process occur at, dekat leaf, dia akan berlaku dekat chloroplast ataupun plastik. Okay, so remember, nitrate to nitrate occur dekat root tissues, okay, dekat cytoplasms. Nitrate to ammoniums occur in plastic and chloroplast or mitochondria. Ammonium is very toxic, so it must be quickly convert into organic compounds. Okay, sebab itulah when the root absorbs nitrates, it will converted into nitrates in cytoplasms, and it will carry to xylems to upper part. Okay, and then when this nitrate reach plant upper part in plant leaf, for example, it will then convert it into ammoniums. Okay, it will not be converted into ammoniums in plant roots because it is very toxic, okay, to the plant. So ammonium assimilations in root occur in mitochondria, and in leaf it will occur in chloroplast. So biasanya when ammonium assimilations occur in roots, it is ammoniums that originated from salt solutions. Okay, kalau plant absorbs nitrogens in a form of ammoniums, it will be assimilated into organic compound in mitochondria. Okay, if plant absorbs nitrates, the nitrogens will be assimilated in upper part, in leaf or in other organs. Okay. So ammoniums is incorporated into amino acids via glutathamine synthesis, glutamate synthase or GS Gogat pathway. Further transformations are carried out make other amino acids from glutamines. Okay. So saya akan detailkan proses-proses ni. So now we know that nitrogen is being uptake by plant in the form of nitrates or ammoniums. If plant absorbs nitrogen in the form of nitrates, it will be reduced into nitrates in cytoplasms of plant root tissues. Okay, and then these nitrates will be transported into upper part via xylems, and then it will reach certain organ in plant tissues. Okay, for example, it reach leaf. So in leaf, these nitrates will be converted into ammoniums. Okay, and then from ammoniums, it will be incorporated into organic compounds via GS Gogat pathway. If these nitrogens uh, converted into amino acids. Kalau dia converted into chlorophyll, dia punya proses lain. Okay. Tapi kita fokus pada conversions, assimilations of nitrogen into amino acids. So this is ammonia. Okay, whether it's be originated from salts or it originated from reductions of nitrates. This ammonia will be incorporated into glutamates. Okay, so this is the glutamates molecular structure. Okay, glutamate is amino acids. So in these glutamates, it already contains amines groups, okay, NH2, and then glutamate also contains carbonyl groups, C carbons that attach to oxygens with double bonds, and the other oxygens attached to the carbon with single bonds. So the ammoniums will be will be incorporated into this part of glutamates. So the carbon or the oxygens that initially attached to carbons will be replaced by ammoniums. Okay, and then produce glutamines. Okay, glutamines daripada glutamates contains two amines groups. This process is catalyzed by glutamine synthase, and it require ATP. Okay, and then uh, in chloroplast, glutamines will be the amines groups. Okay, the amines groups in glutamines will be uh, apa? Dia akan dipindahkan. Okay, will be moved to phosphoglutarate. Okay, kalau awak tengok dekat sini, phosphoglutarate dia punya molecular structure seems like glutamate. The difference is this is carbonyl groups, carbon that attach to double bond oxygens, and then the other carbonyl groups, carbon attached to single bond of oxygens. Okay, so glutamines contains two amine groups. One of the amine groups will be transfer into two also glutarate dekat sini. So this process will produce two glutamates. Okay, dari mana glutamates ni datang? Satu daripada two also glutarate, and then lagi satu daripada glutamines. Bila glutamines tadi lost one of its amine groups, dia jadi glutamates balik. Okay, yang two also glutarates, dia jadi glutamate juga sebab it receive amines group from glutamines. So these glutamates, okay, can be the amines group from glutamates can be decatabolized and produce other amino acids, or it can enter against Golgi pathway and bind with other ammoniums, and then the process dia jadi cycles. The process will jadi semula. Okay. In chloroplast, the enzymes that catalyze this process is glutamate synthase or GOGAT. But in mitochondria, the enzymes involved in this process is glutamic acid dehydrogenase. Okay, so ingat tadi nitrates dia boleh can be reduced again to ammonia in chloroplast. So if the assimilation process occur in chloroplast, the enzymes involved is GOGAT. Okay, so kalau dia berlaku dekat akar ataupun mitochondria, enzymes yang involved adalah GDH, glutamic acid dehydrogenase. Okay, so this is for uptake and assimilations of nitrogens in plant tissues. Okay, for phosphate is available for plant uptake in orthophosphate. Okay, phosphorus is available for plant uptake in orthophosphate. Okay, ataupun phosphate kita panggil. Plant usually face problems to take phosphorus from soil solutions into root tissues. Why? Because phosphorus concentrations mainly in soil is very low compared to plant root tissues. Okay, so bila elements move from lower concentrations to high concentrations, usually the uptake process involve active transport, require protein transporter or required energy. Okay, so same goes like nitrogens. Plant also have specialized transporter to extract or to transport, to move phosphorus or phosphate from soil solutions into root tissues. Phosphorus also has efflux systems, okay, macam nitrogen tadi. So this process actually untuk redistributes the phosphorus when phosphorus is no longer supplied. So phosphorus is principally supplied to the plant root via diffusions rather mass flow. Okay, so jangan keliru dengan this statement. Phosphorus been uptake from soil solutions into root tissues by active transport. Okay, however, the movement of phosphorus from soil solutions to plant root vicinity is by mass flow ataupun by diffusions. Okay, so dia ada dua pergerakan daripada soil solutions kepada kawasan berdekatan akar. Selepas phosphorus dah bergerak daripada soil solutions kepada kawasan berdekatan dengan akar, dia akan absorbed by plants. The absorptions is required energy or active transport. Tapi perpindahan or movement of phosphate from soil solutions into plant root vicinity is uh, passive transport. Okay, so you must very clear with these two process. Okay, phosphorus uptake occur primarily at young root tips into the epidermal cells with root hair and into cells in the outer layer of the plant root cortex. Okay, so actually not only phosphorus, other elements for example potassium, apa-apa elements dia kebanyakannya berlaku dekat root tips ataupun root hair. Okay, sebab apa? Dekat mature root tissue dia ada Casparian stripe. Okay, so this Casparian strips dia menghalang movements of elements. Okay, sebab tu elemen-elemen biasanya diabsorb daripada root hair. Okay, so this is phosphorus. Phosphorus, the uptakes, okay, required energy by specialized transporter. Same goes to potassium ions. Okay, so potassium is taken into the plant by transport systems present in plasma membranes of root, epidermals, and cortical cells. Root can activate different potassium uptake systems to active their environments. Okay. Non-selective channels are probably the main pathway for potassium uptake at high concentrations. At intermediate concentrations, the active potassium transporter 1 channels dominate potassium uptakes. At lower concentrations of external potassiums, active potassium transporter channel together with high affinity potassium uptake systems contribute to potassium acquisitions. Okay, so for potassium uptakes by plants is very unique. Okay, unlike nitrogen and phosphorus involve active transport, but for potassiums, the uptake from soil solutions can be passive transport or active transport, depend on the concentrations of potassium ion in soil solutions. If this potassium ion exists in soil solutions in very high concentrations, plant root will absorb these elements through non-selective channels. Okay, passive transport. These channels will not require any uh, apa tak perlukan energy. Okay, but when the concentrations of potassium is very low or intermediate, plant will activate its certain transporter to uptake this potassium ion from soil solutions. Okay, for example, in intermediate concentrations, uh, what is meant by intermediate concentrations? Usually, the concentrations of potassium ion is 1 millimoles. Okay, um, active potassium transporter 1 will dominate the transport, the movement or the uptake of potassium ions. At very low concentrations, there are specific transport systems which call high affinity potassium ions and also active uh, potassium transporter 1. Okay, dia akan ambil uh, potassium ion from soil solutions into root tissues. Okay, so ingat nitrogens dia ada nitrate transporter and ammonium transporter. For phosphate dia ada phosphate transporter. For for potassiums, they have non-selective potassium channels. This is usually the uptake of potassiums when potassiums exist in soil solutions in very high concentrations. There are also active potassium transporter 1 and high affinity potassium transporter. So AKT1s involved in potassium ions from soil solutions when potassium concentration in soil solutions is intermediate or very low. What is intermediate solutions? What is intermediate concentrations of potassium in soil solutions? 1 millimole. Okay. In very low, AKT1 and high affinity potassium transporter will involve in potassium ion uh, uptakes by plant roots. Okay. So what happened to nitrate after being taken up by plant root tissues? Okay. There are four possibilities. It can be efflux, or it will return into apoplast again. It can be stored into vacuoles. It can be transported into other organs, and usually it will be reduced into nitrates and ammoniums. Okay, so remember that. So the last topic for our uh, lecture today is deficiency symptoms of NPK. Okay, so remember, usually the deficiency symptoms related to its physiological functions in plants. Okay, for example, nitrogens. What is the physiological functions of nitrogen in plant? Nitrogens required by plant for growth because it required for plant to produce amino acids, and it also required by plant for chlorophyll synthesis because in chlorophyll uh, molecule it contains nitrogens ions. So the few symptoms will be related to its physiological functions in plant. The different symptoms of nitrogens usually chlorosis, stunted growth, and also lower yields. Chlorosis can be symptoms for different kind of essential elements. Um, Nitrogens, magnesium, sulfur, ions deficiency will manifested by chlorosis symptoms. Okay. However, to determine whether nitrogens, sulfur, magnesium, or iron involved in this chlorosis, we usually look at the chlorosis patterns and the organs involved. If the organ involved adalah dekat bahagian yang dah tua. Okay. So this is, ini bukan nitrogen deficiency symptoms. Gambar yang saya tunjuk ni. Sebab apa? For nitrogen deficiency symptoms, the chlorosis will be appear on all the leaf. However, in this picture, the chlorosis appear on new organs, okay, new leaf. Okay. Kalau kita tengok dekat sini, all the organs dia okay saja. So this is actually not nitrogen deficiency symptoms. Okay. So saya nanti tukar, saya tersilap letak gambar. Okay. Kalau nitrogen deficiency symptoms, dia punya chlorosis dekat lower organs ataupun daun yang dah tua. Apart from that, kita tahu nitrogen is required by plants to produce amino acids. Amino acids is building blocks for living organisms. Okay. So lack of nitrogen the plant will produce lack of amino acids. Eventually, it will produce a smaller or lower growth of plants. Okay, kalau kita tengok kat sini, ini adalah pokok padi that we supply with adequate nitrogens. Okay, and then the other one, Oryza sativa or padi that receive insufficient amount of nitrogens. Okay, what happens? Not only we can observe the color of the leaf is more darker in plant that receive adequate nitrogens, but the growth is also enhanced compared to plant that receive insufficient amount of nitrogens. Okay. Apart from that, insufficient nitrogens in plant will produce lower yields. Okay. For example, this is a kernel of maize. The right ones is maize that receive adequate amount of nitrogens. Okay. And then the other ones, maize or corns that receive lower amount of nitrogen. Okay, so that the symptoms of nitrogen deficiency in plants. Okay, so usually we must relate these different symptoms with its um, physiological functions. So same goes to phosphorus. We know that primary macronutrients is limiting factor for plant growth. So the deficiency symptoms of these primary macronutrients will produce uh, mm, apa, lower growth and also uh, lower yields. Okay. Tapi untuk phosphorus dia ada satu karakteristik yang istimewa. Apa dia karakteristik dia? Selain daripada stunted growth, lower yields, plant that suffer from phosphorus deficiency will show discolorations. Okay. So biasanya kita akan nampak daun dia berubah menjadi warna purple macam ni. Okay, sebab apa jadi macam ni? Dia ada secondary secondary metabolite depositions. Apa pigment yang biasa memberi warna pada bunga tu kita panggil apa? Anthocyanins. Okay, so a lack of phosphorus will cause anthocyanins depositions in plant leaf. Okay, so sebab apa? Apa fungsi phosphorus ni? Kalau awak masih ingat, apa fungsi phosphorus? Ingat fungsi phosphorus? Mas Rizal, apa fungsi phosphorus? Salah satu dia adalah flower initiations. Okay? Kalau awak tengok flower tu, kenapa dia berwarna ungu, berwarna kuning? Sebab anthocyanins. Okay? There are different type of anthocyanins. Anthocyanins A, anthocyanins B, anthocyanidins. And the color of these anthocyanins depend on the pH. So imbalance of phosphorus will cause imbalance concentrations of apa tadi? Anthocyanins. Okay. So kita tahu phosphorus is required for flower initiations and fruitings. So bila plant produce anthocyanins, so, biasa anthocyanins ni dia akan deposit into flower yang menjadikan pokok bunga tu warna ungu ataupun warna kuning, pink. Okay. Tapi sebab concentrations of phosphorus lower, and then the flowerings cannot be initiated. The anthocyanins produced by the plant tadi dia akan deposit into dekat mana? Dekat daun tadi. Sebab tu kita akan nampak dia jadi warna macam ni tadi. Okay, faham? And then potassiums. Okay, so the deficiency symptoms of potassium is stunted growth. Okay, so same goes to nitrogens, phosphorus, because they are primary macronutrients required by plant for optimum growth. Any deficiency of one of these elements will produce stunted growth and lower yields. Okay, apart from that, deficiency of potassium will be manifested by on the leaf will show chlorotics and necrotic symptoms as small strips along the leaves margins, and then leaf will lose turgor and appear flaccid. Okay, so remember what is the functions of potassiums in in plant. Salah satunya adalah sebagai osmoregulations. It will control the water concentrations in plant tissues. Okay, for example, kalau awak ingat lagi, stomata openings involve potassium concentrations. Okay, sama juga macam tisu-tisu yang lain. Kalau potassium exists in tissues liquidly, the water will fill in that tissue accordingly. Okay, sebab dia akan balance kan apa tadi uh, water movement tadi. Okay. Tapi if the plant contains lower amount of potassium dekat sini, okay, so the plant will show necrotic symptoms. Necrotic symptoms ni adalah sel-sel yang mati. Sebab apa sel-sel ni mati? Because dia punya dia water contains in this tissue is very low. So the metabolic process kena occur and then eventually the cells will die. Okay. So sama juga macam leaf will lose turgor and appear flaccid because the concentrations of potassium is crucial for apa tadi for the osmoregulations process. Okay, so lack of potassium will cause lack of water in plant tissues. Okay, and eventually sebab tak ada air, metabolic process tak boleh berlaku, sel tu mati, dia akan menghasilkan chlorotic and necrotic symptoms. Okay, so faham? Each different symptoms usually dia akan berkait rapat dengan physiological functions of the elements. Okay, any questions? Ini baru lecture minggu lepas, tak masuk lagi lecture minggu ni. Any questions? Ada soalan tak?
No.
So, betul tak ada soalan ya?
Not yet.
Okay. Not yet. Kalau tak ada soalan, kita rehat sekejap before we continue with our new topics, our new lecture. So kita rehat selama 5 minit. Okay. We continue at 11:23. Okay. Okay. uh, Awak semua boleh dengar suara saya ya? Boleh kita sambung?
Boleh
Boleh.
doktor.
Okay, we have already discussed about untuk plant nutrition, we know that there are 17 different kind of plant essential plant nutrient required by plants. So we can group or divide these elements in various way. Whether we can group this element based on its source, its functions in plant physiology, or it can divided into mobility. But for our class, plant nutrition, I will discuss these elements according to uh, it requirement by plants, the amount required by plants. Okay, so that we have uh, macronutrients, consist primary macronutrients, secondary macronutrients, and also we have primary macronutrients. Before we continue with our lecture, saya nak tahu petang ni awak semua boleh hadir ke ataupun ada yang kena quarantine tak boleh datang lab? Ada yang tak boleh? Ada tak? Semua boleh datang ya?
Boleh, insyaAllah.
Boleh.
So kalau semua boleh datang tak ada masalah, sebab saya takut saya terlupa ada yang macam ada beberapa kelas ada students yang tak boleh hadir face to face because they are CC1, they have quarantine. So in that case I have to do the lab sessions face to face dengan online juga dalam masa yang sama, sebab nak apa untuk apa, untuk yang tak datang yang kena quarantine. Tapi kalau awak semua boleh datang, okey lah, no problems. Okay, for secondary secondary, silap tajuk kat sini, tajuk betul tadi, kat sini salah. Secondary macronutrients for plant nutrition, we divided this lecture into 4 topics, which are functions of secondary macronutrients in plant physiology, the physical chemicals properties of secondary macronutrients in elements in soils, and its disease symptoms in plants. Okay, so let us start with first topic. So what is secondary macronutrients in plant nutrition? So we know that primary is mineral elements that required by plant in large amount, in high amounts. How large it required by plants? Usually NPK elements concentrations in plant driver is more than 5%. Okay, 0.5%. Okay, higher than 0.5%. For secondary macronutrients, the concentrations of this element is between 0.1% to 0.4%. Okay, so macronutrients concentrations in plant tissues is higher than 0.1%. However, if we can divide it further, these elements, we can divide it into macro and primary and secondary. Primary, the concentrations of the elements in plant tissues is higher than 0.5. For secondary, the concentration is between 0.5 to 0.1%. Okay, the elements in secondary macronutrients is calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. Okay, so we go one by one. What is the functions of each of these secondary macronutrients in plant physiology? We go for calcium first. So generally, functions of calcium can be divided into four main areas. It functions in cell membranes, it functions in enzymes, it functions in cell wall, and also it functions in phytohormones. Okay, so how calciums involved in cell membranes? Uh, calciums can forms intermolecules bindings and intramolecules bindings. What is mean intermolecules bindings? It will bind with two different because uh, it can exist in 2 plus, so it can uh, bind to at least two different hydrogen ions. Okay, so it can bind with hydrogen ion within the molecules, and it can bind with hydrogen ion between other molecules. Okay, so for example, in cell membranes, calcium ion can bridge phosphate and carboxylate groups of phospholipid and proteins at membrane surface and help maintain membrane structure. Okay, so kita tahu kan dekat you know that in cell membranes we have uh, bifos apa uh, uh, biphosphate layer kan, kita ada biphosphate layer, and then dekat in this biphosphate layer there are proteins, carbonyl groups that embed into these biphosphates. So to make uh, the structure of plasma membranes stable, the calciums will bridge, okay, the binding between phosphate in bilayer plasma membranes with carbonyl groups uh, dia akan apa will bridge phosphate and carboxylate group in phospholipid and proteins. Maksud dia kita ada proteins, kita ada phospholipid, okay, bilayer. So calcium ni dia punya fungsi dia akan attach with proteins, and at the same time it will attach to carboxylate groups of phospholipid. So the structure, um, the plasma membranes will be more stable. Okay, sebab binding of this calcium tadi. Okay, apart from that, calcium also can involve in enzymes activations. Calcium could inhibit cytoplasmic enzyme directly or by competing with magnesiums. Okay, and calciums also can react with calcium binding proteins, calmodulins, and this binding enables it to activate a larger number of enzymes. Okay, so in here, calciums can be enzymes activator or enzymes deactivator. So how it can becomes enzymes deactivator? Magnesiums, certain proteins, certain enzymes require cofactor. What is cofactor? Cofactor is elements that require to bind with enzymes so that the enzymes becomes activates. It active sites exposed and can be activated. There are certain enzymes that require magnesiums to activate these enzymes so that the enzyme can catalyze certain metabolic process. Um, calciums can deactivate these certain enzymes by binding at active site of these enzymes. So these enzymes initially require magnesiums to activate, to become active. But when calciums bind at the same enzymes, it will prevent magnesiums to activate the respective enzymes. So the metabolic process will not occur. So that's how calciums can deactivate certain metabolic process. Apart from that, magnesiums also can become enzymes activator. It can activate the enzyme so that the enzyme can catalyze certain metabolic process. How? There are two processes. Either the calcium itself bind to the directly to the enzymes, and then it will the binding will induce conformation changes in enzyme structure, so the enzyme become active, or the calciums can bind with a certain proteins we call calmodulins. Okay, so when this calciums bind with calmodulins becomes active, and when calmodulin become active, it will bind to a certain enzymes. When calmodulins bind to that enzymes, and that enzyme become active, and it can catalyze certain metabolic process. So dia punya proses tu dia panjang sikit. Okay. Kalau calcium become cofactor, it can bind directly to enzymes. If the calcium become enzyme activator, it must bind with certain protein first, and then that protein will bind to enzymes, and then eventually the enzyme become active. Okay. Um, Apart from that, calcium's also important for kita panggil apa? Strong cell wall developments. Okay, why? Um, Calcium is required by plant to synthesize calcium peptide. Calcium peptide. What is calcium peptide? Calcium peptide is like a glue. Okay, so this calcium peptide will be filled in the area between the adjacent cells. Okay, so kalau dekat plant cells tu, we have two adjacent cells. So this area we call middle lamella. So the plant will synthesize calcium peptide, and then this compound will be filled in this middle lamella. So calcium peptide will serve like a glue. It will attach the adjacent cells together. Okay, so lack of calcium peptide will disrupt, dia akan hasilkan uh, uh, organ yang tak kuat. Okay, so without calcium, the cell wall are unable to stabilize and hold their content. This is particularly important for developing fruits. Okay, without calcium, the cell wall are weak and unable to hold contents of the fruits. Apart from that, stronger cell wall will avoid invasions of plant pathogens like virus, bacteria, or fungi. Because in order for these microorganisms to induce disease in plant, it must penetrate or invade into plant tissues. So this process usually initiated by secretions of catalytic enzymes by the pathogens. So pathogen will secrete catalytic enzymes, and these enzymes will dissolve the cell wall. Okay, so that the pathogens can invade into plant tissues and cells. So if the plant can produce adequate or cukup ataupun optimum calcium peptides, it will assist in um, cell wall structure, and also it can produce a strong cell wall, okay, ataupun cell layer. Okay, so that bila ada pathogens dia nak penetrate into plant tissues, dia tak boleh penetrates because the middle lamella of the cells filled with calcium peptide, which cannot be degraded by catalytic enzymes produced by pathogens. Okay. Apart from that, calciums also can interact with hormone, a plant hormone. Okay. For example, Increase in shoot concentrations of abscisic acids following impositions of water deficit stress lead to increased cytoplasmic concentrations of calcium ion in gut cells and increase that proceed with stomatal closure. So I have already explained to you stomata closings and opening is controlled by potassium ions. That case happen during normal conditions. Okay, so what mechanisms that induce potassium ion to fill into gut cells? There are certain photoreceptor in gut cells. Okay, when this photoreceptor receive specific intensity of sunlight, it will activate potassium pump in plasma membranes. So, biasanya waktu tengah hari, bila intensity cahaya matahari itu sangat terang, biasanya stomata tu akan tertutup. Sebab apa? Dekat gut cells tu, dia ada photoreceptor. Dekat tengah hari, when the photoreceptor when the sunlight hit the photoreceptor at certain intensity, when it reach a certain threshold, it will activate potassium pump. Okay, and then it will pump in potassium ion. The potassium concentrations in cytoplasm will reduce the osmotic pressure of osmotic water potentials in gut cells. So, water dia akan masuk ke masuk pula. Dia akan kalau tengah hari, bila intensity cahaya matahari tu tinggi, dia akan strike photoreceptor dekat gut cells tu. Apa yang berlaku? Potassium ion akan pump out. Okay, bukan pump in. Dia pump out potassium ion. So, bila concentrations of potassium ion in gut cells become lower, the water potentials become higher. So, water will move from high potentials to lower water potentials. So, when water move out from gut cells, the gut cell become bila malam tak ada cahaya matahari, kejadian apa, the reverse process will occur. Okay, so that happen in normal conditions, but in stress conditions, especially in water deficit stress, what happens? The concentrations of abscisic acids will increase. Okay, when abscisic acid increase, the reactive oxygen series will also increase. The increment or the increasing of reactive oxygen series within the cells, not only stomata or gut cells, in other cells, will indicate stress happens. Okay, macam awak lah, kalau awak terlampau stres, kena baca nota banyak, lab work banyak, ataupun assignment banyak, badan awak akan stres. Bila awak terasa stres tu, awak akan hasilkan certain hormone. That hormone will produce a lot of reactive oxygen series. Okay, so this reactive oxygen series will induce cascade reactions. Dia akan depend lah organ mana yang ditinggi, dia punya reactions tu depend. If kita cerita pasal plant, if the reactive oxygen series concentrations increase in gut cell or stomata cells, that indicate plant experience water deficits or extreme temperature that require plant to close its stomata. Okay, dia tak macam potassium tadi. Potassium tu dia depend kepada cahaya matahari. Tapi kalau abscisic acid atau ROS ni, dia boleh juga berlaku waktu malam. Okay, so biar contoh plant tu kita tak siram satu hari, malam keadaan dia bertambah kering, apa berlaku? Abscisic acid tinggi, Lactic acid tu dia akan induce increase in reactive oxygen series, and then reactive oxygen series will activate calcium channels. What happens? Calciums will be pumped into no, not pumped in calciums will be pumped out into from gut cells. Okay, so apa yang berlaku bila calciums tu okay, okay, so bila bila ROS ni tinggi, ROS ni akan activate calcium channel. Okay, so what happens? So bila calcium masuk ke dalam stomata, dia akan menyebabkan potassium ion pula keluar, okay, daripada gut cells ni. Okay, so kita ingat dalam keadaan in normal conditions, the potassiums will be pumped out when the photoreceptor struck by high intensity of light. But in this case, the potassium ion is pumped out due to high concentrations of calcium ion in gut cells. Okay, so bila calcium ion tinggi, potassium dia akan activate potassium ion. Okay, so potassium will be pumped out to automate keluar daripada gut cells. Apa berlaku? Bila concentrations of potassium menurun, water potentials become higher. Okay, so we remember, awak mesti ingat potassium dia tak akan bind to organic compound. Dia akan exist in tissues in ionic forms. Okay, tak macam calcium. Calcium dia boleh bind with molecules. Okay, when calcium bind with molecules, dia tak akan mengganggu osmoregulations. Okay, so in this case, the pump in the movement of calciums into gut cells will induce activations of potassium pumps. Potassium dia akan dipump keluar, water potential become higher, and then apa yang berlaku? Air dia akan move out from higher water potential to lower water potentials, and then the stomata will be closed. Okay, faham tak? Okay tak? Ingat ya, stomata opening or stomata regulations by potassium biasanya dalam calcium dia dalam keadaan stress. Okay, that's for calciums. Magnesiums has major physiological and molecular roles in plants, such as it serves as a central atoms in chlorophyll molecules. Okay, so this is porphyrins. We call porphyrins molecules. I have explained to you last week, porphyrins molecules are same like hemoglobin's molecules. Okay, so tapi yang membezakan dia apa? Hemoglobins dia punya central atoms adalah ions. For chlorophylls, the porphyrins, the central atoms is magnesiums. Okay, so magnesium is required by plant for chlorophyll synthesis. Okay, apart from that, magnesium also serve as a cofactor for enzymes activations. Examples: magnesium is required for rubisco carboxylase enzyme that involved in photosynthesis process, okay, to activate these enzymes. Apart from that, magnesium also is required to activate fructose 1,6 biphosphates. Okay, so fructose 1,6 biphosphate ni dalam apa? Kalau awak ingat. Dalam ingat tak fruktos dalam glycolysis dihasilkan
Carbon cycle.
Krebs cycle ke? Glycolysis
Carbon.
carbon cycle.
Carbon cycle.
Okey, yang dalam apa? Okey. Fructose 1,6 biophosphates. Okay, so both enzymes are being activated by magnesiums. Actually, these not only two enzymes that require magnesiums as a cofactor. There are a lot of other enzymes that require metal, especially magnesiums, for their activations. Apart from that, magnesium is also required to stabilize ribosomes structure. So we know that ribosomes structure comprise two subunits, okay? A major subunits and small subunits. So if this subunit is not stabilized, the amino acid cannot be synthesized. So the stabilizations of ribosomes is assisted by magnesiums, okay? So that's the functions of magnesiums in plant physiology. Sulfur also is one of secondary macronutrients. Um, Sulfur is required by plants mostly for synthesis of amino acids. Okay, so 90% of sulfur in plant present in cysteine and also methionines. Okay, apart from that, sulfur is also crucial for chlorophyll formations, although it is not a constituent of chlorophyll. So why sulfur is crucial for chlorophyll synthesis even though it is not part of chlorophyll structure? Sebab apa? Saya rasa awak ada belajar ni dalam plant physiology kot. Kenapa? Sulfur dia is not molecular constituent of chlorophyll but is vital for chlorophyll formations because sulfur in plant largely present in amino acid cysteine and methionines. So these amino acid is components of enzymes that catalyze chlorophyll formations. So without sulfur, they will know or lack of cysteine and methionines. So lack of these amino acids, there will be eventually lack of enzymes required for chlorophyll synthesis. Okay, so the sulfur deficiency symptoms, kalau kita tengok tumbuh dekat tumbuh pokok, salah satunya dia punya symptoms adalah chlorosis, even though sulfur not directly involved in structural formations of chlorophylls. Okay, sulfur also required or crucial for synthesis of oil. This is why liquid sulfur is crucial for oilseed. Okay. Bukan saja sulfur, apa-apa apa apa-apa buah yang ada bau kita panggil bau tengik macam bawang putih, it actually contain sulfur. Okay. Macam durian, okay. So selain bawang putih yang bau dia macam tengik, durian juga bau dia kuat kan. So kalau awak makan durian, awak rasa pahit dan bau dia sangat kuat, that mean that variety of durian contain high sulfur. Okay. Sulfur also is important for thiamines and biotins. Thiamines is vitamins B. Okay, so this is a molecular structure of biotins and also thiamines. So if you observe, there's a sulfur in biotin and also thiamines uh, molecular structure. Okay, any questions? Ada soalan? Pukul berapa ya? Oh dah 11.55, ada 5 minit lagi. So we stop here. Before we stop, any questions? Ada soalan tak? Saya hari ni susah sikit lah nak bercakap sebab tekak saya sakit. Few weeks back, I was infected with COVID-19. Saya tak ada demam, tak ada pening kepala, cuma saya macam ada batuk. Tapi sampai sekarang, tekak saya tu walaupun saya test dah negatif, tapi sampai sekarang tekak saya still rasa sakit. Okay. So any questions before we end our class sessions for today? Sarahani, any questions Sarahani? Mana Sarahani? Tak ada. Okay, so awak duduk satu bilik dengan ni lah, Sarifah Aruna. Oh, okay. Siapa ya selain tu? Zulharis, okay? Any questions, Zulharis?
Tak ada, doktor.
No questions. Husna, okay?
Okay, Doctor, no question.
Ni gambar awak apa ni? Tengah terbalik ke, Husna?
Gambar internet, Doctor.
Okay. So if there is no questions, don't forget we have lab sessions on this afternoon at lab plant science 2. Dr. Shami also will involve in these lab sessions because basically this afternoons we will prepare fertilizer formulations and we will observe different kind of fertilizer available in the markets. How to prepare this fertilizer? Basically we follow the concentrations of each element in plant tissues. Okay, so that will be our panduan. Okay, sebagai contoh berapa banyak kita nak letak nitrogen in our formulations, berapa banyak kita nak letak ions. Basically we follow the concentrations of element in plant tissues. And then what kind of elements? Okay, for example, we know nitrogen is required by plant in the form of ammoniums or nitrates. So what kind of fertilizer that we can use to supply nitrogen in this kind of forms? Okay, so nanti petang kita akan belajar tu semua. Until that, thank you for your times and for your attentions during my class. I would like to apologize kalau ada apa-apa kekurangan. So, Assalamualaikum. Jumpa lagi petang nanti. Okay, terima kasih semua.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Doctor.